April 29, 1945, Dachau, Germany. American tanks roll through the gates of one of Nazi Germany's oldest and most notorious concentration camps. Thousands of prisoners, starving, sick, barely alive, see their liberators for the first time, but many can't believe what they're seeing. The soldiers freeing them aren't white, they're black. For prisoners who've survived years of Nazi racial ideology, who've been told that Aryans are the master race, that all other peoples are inferior, that racial hierarchy defines human worth. The sight of black American soldiers as their liberators is cognitively impossible. Some prisoners think they're hallucinating. Others believe the black soldiers are a mirage, a dream created by their starving minds. Several prisoners who haven't spoken in months or years due to trauma begin speaking again for the first time, because the shock of seeing black liberators breaks through their psychological paralysis. One survivor later recalled, "We'd been taught that black people were subhuman, and here they were, in American uniforms with weapons, setting us free. It destroyed everything the Nazis had told us." In that moment, their entire ideology collapsed. But here's the devastating irony. These black soldiers, these heroes who liberated death camps, who freed victims of Nazi racial persecution, would return home to an America that still enforced Jim Crow segregation. They'd ride to the back of buses. They'd be denied service at restaurants. They'd face violence for daring to vote. They freed victims of racism in Europe, then returned to face racism in America. This is one of the most profound and overlooked stories of World War II. If you want to see more forgotten history, stories that reveal uncomfortable truths, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We're building a global community that refuses to let these stories stay buried. This is the story of black soldiers liberating Nazi concentration camps. It's about the moment when two groups of people, both deemed inferior by racist ideologies, met in the ruins of history's greatest evil. And it starts with understanding who these soldiers were and what they were about to witness. The black soldiers who participated in liberating Nazi concentration camps came from several units, but the most documented are the 761st Tank Battalion, nicknamed the Black Panthers, an all-black armored unit that fought with General Patton's Third Army across France and into Germany. They saw 183 consecutive days of combat, one of the longest sustained combat records of any unit in World War II. The 183rd Engineer Combat Battalion Black Engineers, who built bridges, cleared minefields, and participated in the liberation of Buchenwald concentration camp. Elements of the 71st Infantry Division, which included black service and support units present at the liberation of Gunskirchen, a sub-camp of Mauthausen. These soldiers had volunteered to serve their country despite facing systematic discrimination. The US military was segregated. Black soldiers served in separate units, often with white officers. They faced discrimination in training, deployment, and recognition. When they enlisted, many hoped that proving themselves in combat would earn them respect and equality at home. They'd heard what their fathers and grandfathers said about World War I. Black soldiers served with distinction in France, and Americans promised things would change. But after World War I, black veterans came home to lynchings, race riots, and continued segregation. Now, in World War II, black soldiers were determined to prove themselves again. They trained harder. They fought fiercer. They endured everything white units endured, and more because they also faced racism from their own military. By early 1945, as Allied forces pushed deep into Germany, black units were among the troops advancing toward Bavaria and central Germany, areas where the Nazis had concentrated many of their camps. These soldiers had heard rumors about Nazi camps. Some had heard whispers about atrocities, but nothing prepared them for what they were about to see, and nothing prepared the prisoners for who was about to liberate them. Buchenwald, April 11, 1945. Elements of the 6th Armored Division, which included black service units, approached Buchenwald concentration camp in central Germany. The camp had been partially evacuated by fleeing SS guards, but thousands of prisoners remained. The first soldiers to enter saw conditions that defied comprehension. Skeletal prisoners in striped uniforms, piles of corpses, barracks designed for 50 people holding 400, disease everywhere. One black soldier later wrote, "I'd seen combat. I'd seen men die, but nothing prepared me for Buchenwald. These weren't soldiers. They were civilians, women, children, and they'd been systematically starved and worked to death." Dachau, April 29, 1945. The 42nd and 45th Infantry Divisions liberated Dachau. While these were primarily white units, black soldiers from support and logistics units were present, and more importantly, in the days following liberation, black units arrived as part of occupation and support operations. Dachau had been the first concentration camp the Nazis opened in March 1933, just weeks after Hitler took power. Over 12 years, over 200,000 people had been imprisoned there. At least 41,500 were murdered. When American troops arrived, they found 32,000 survivors in conditions that shocked even hardened combat veterans. Rail cars full of corpses, mass graves barely covered, prisoners so emaciated they looked like living skeletons. Some American soldiers, upon seeing the conditions, broke down, weeping. Others became enraged. Several accounts describe American soldiers executing SS guards who'd been captured. The prisoners' reactions. For many prisoners, particularly those who'd been imprisoned for years, Nazi propaganda had been their only source of information about the world. They'd been told repeatedly that Germans were the master race, that Aryans were superior to all other peoples, and that black people were at the bottom of the racial hierarchy, barely human. The Nazis had used films, posters, and lectures to teach prisoners their racial ideology. Some prisoners, especially German political prisoners or those arrested early in the Nazi regime, knew this was propaganda. But others, particularly those from Eastern Europe or those imprisoned for years, had been so isolated that Nazi racial theories were the only framework they had. So when black American soldiers appeared as their liberators, in uniform, with weapons, clearly in positions of authority and power, it created cognitive dissonance so profound that many prisoners couldn't initially process it. E.G. McConnell, a black soldier with the 761 Tank Battalion, described liberating prisoners. "They couldn't believe we were black. Some of them had never seen a black person before. The Nazis had told them we were subhuman, and here we were, their liberators." Leon Bass, another black soldier present at Buchenwald, recalled, "Some prisoners just stared at us. One man reached out and touched my skin, like he was checking if I was real. Then he started crying. Later, through an interpreter, he said seeing us freed him broke something in his mind. Everything the Nazis had taught him was a lie." Several documented accounts describe prisoners who'd stopped speaking due to trauma, selective mutism from severe PTSD, beginning to speak again after seeing black liberators. The shock of the liberation, combined with the cognitive impossibility of black soldiers as saviors, somehow broke through their psychological paralysis. This wasn't universal. Many prisoners reacted with pure joy at being liberated, regardless of their liberator's race. Others were too sick or traumatized to process anything. But the documented accounts of prisoners specifically reacting to black liberators, with disbelief, shock, and sometimes breakthrough emotional responses, reveal something profound about the psychological impact of the liberation. We're at the heart of this story, the moment when Nazi racial ideology met its destruction. If you're finding this valuable, make sure you're subscribed. We're building the most comprehensive collection of World War II stories on YouTube. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people. The liberation of concentration camps by black soldiers created a unique psychological moment in history. It wasn't just about physical freedom, it was about the destruction of an ideology. For the prisoners, Dr. Robert Abzug, a historian who's studied camp liberations extensively, describes this as a double liberation. Prisoners were freed from physical captivity, but they were also freed from the psychological prison of Nazi racial ideology. Many prisoners had internalized, to some degree, the Nazi racial hierarchy, not because they believed it, but because it had been the only framework available to them for years. They'd been told repeatedly that Germans were superior, that Jews and Slavs were inferior, and that black people were at the absolute bottom. When black American soldiers appeared as their liberators, competent, armed in positions of authority, it didn't just free them from the camps. It demonstrated viscerally and undeniably that the Nazi racial ideology was a lie. One survivor, Ben Bender, who was liberated from a subcamp of Dachau, later said, "When I saw the black soldiers, I thought I was dreaming. The Nazis had told us black people were animals, but these men were soldiers. They were organized. They were saving us. In that moment, I realized everything the Nazis had taught was insane." Several documented cases describe prisoners who developed selective mutism. They'd stopped speaking due to severe trauma. Seeing black soldiers as liberators created such cognitive shock that it broke through their psychological barriers. They began speaking again, often within hours or days of liberation. This phenomenon isn't universal. Many prisoners didn't react this way, but enough documented cases exist that it's a recognized psychological pattern among liberation responses. For the black soldiers, the psychological impact on black soldiers was equally profound, but in a different way. These soldiers had just witnessed the ultimate consequence of racial ideology taken to its extreme. They'd seen what happens when a government decides certain races are inferior and acts on that belief systematically. Leon Bass, who helped liberate Buchenwald, later became a civil rights activist and educator. He said, "When I saw Buchenwald, I understood what racial hatred could become. I saw what happened when people accepted the idea that some races were better than others. And I thought about America, about segregation, about lynchings, about all the ways we were told we were inferior. Buchenwald showed me where that thinking leads. But there was also a cruel irony that black soldiers couldn't escape. They were liberating victims of racial persecution while serving in a segregated military, representing a country that enforced racial segregation. E.G. McConnell described the cognitive dissonance. We freed these people from Nazi racism. Then we got on segregated transport to go back to camp. We weren't allowed in the same mess hall as white soldiers. We were fighting racism in Europe while living under racism from our own military. Some black soldiers found the experience empowering. They'd proven their courage, competence, and humanity in the most profound way possible. Others found it deeply frustrating and radicalizing. Why should they accept segregation at home after proving themselves abroad? Long-term impact. Many black veterans who participated in camp liberations became civil rights activists after the war. They'd seen what racial ideology could do when taken to its extreme, and they refused to accept even mild forms of it at home. The connection between Holocaust liberation and the civil rights movement is direct. Many veterans explicitly cited their experiences liberating camps as motivation for fighting segregation in America. Leon Bass spent decades speaking to students about both the Holocaust and civil rights, explicitly connecting the two. He'd show photos of Buchenwald, then photos of lynchings in America, and ask students, what's the difference? Both are racial hatred. Both dehumanize people. The only difference is scale. For Holocaust survivors, meeting Black American liberators often became a defining memory. Many survivors, in later testimonies, specifically mentioned the race of their liberators, not because it was unusual for black soldiers to be heroic, but because it so perfectly contradicted Nazi ideology. Elie Wiesel, who was liberated from Buchenwald, later wrote about the diversity of American liberators. The Americans who freed us weren't all alike. Some were black, some white. Some spoke languages we didn't know. But they were all Americans, and they were all heroes. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. Black soldiers who liberated concentration camps begin the process of returning home. They've served with distinction. They've witnessed and ended one of history's greatest evils. They've proven their courage, competence, and humanity. Surely America will welcome them as heroes. Surely things will have changed. They haven't. Black soldiers return to a segregated America. In the South, they're required to sit in the back of buses. They're denied service at restaurants. They're turned away from hotels. They face violence if they try to vote. In the North, while legal segregation is less explicit, housing discrimination, job discrimination, and social segregation are still pervasive. Some black veterans, still in uniform, are attacked by white civilians for acting uppity or not knowing their place. Several are lynched, murdered for the crime of being black veterans who might challenge the racial order. The contrast is impossible to ignore. They freed victims of racial persecution in Europe and returned to face racial persecution in America. Isaac Woodard, a black Army sergeant, was pulled off a bus in South Carolina in 1946, still in uniform, and beaten so severely by police that he was permanently blinded. His crime? Asking to use a restroom. The irony wasn't lost on veterans. They'd destroyed the Nazi ideology of racial supremacy, only to confront America's own version at home. But something had changed. These veterans weren't willing to accept segregation anymore. They'd seen what racial ideology could become. They'd liberated death camps. They'd proven themselves in the most extreme circumstances possible. Many black veterans became activists. They joined or founded civil rights organizations. They registered voters. They challenged segregation laws. They demanded the equality they'd been promised. The connection is direct. The black soldiers who liberated concentration camps helped spark the civil rights movement. Organizations like the NAACP and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had significant participation from black World War II veterans. These men had seen the ultimate consequence of accepting racial ideology, and they refused to tolerate it in any form. When white Americans said, "Be patient, change takes time," black veterans would respond, "We saw Dachau. We saw Buchenwald. We know where separate but equal leads. We're not waiting anymore." The double victory campaign, victory over fascism abroad, victory over racism at home, had been the rallying cry during the war. After the war, black veterans made it real. The story of black soldiers liberating Nazi concentration camps matters today for several reasons. First, it challenges the greatest generation mythology. Americans love to tell stories about World War II as the Good War, a time when the nation was united against evil. But that narrative erases the reality of segregation. Black Americans served, fought, and sacrificed while facing discrimination from their own military and country. Acknowledging this doesn't diminish the fight against Nazism. It makes it more complex and more honest. Second, it reveals the hypocrisy of fighting racism abroad while enforcing it at home. The United States fought a war against Nazi racial ideology while maintaining its own system of racial segregation. Black soldiers liberated victims of racism while serving in a segregated military. This isn't ancient history, it's within living memory. Understanding this contradiction is essential to understanding America's ongoing struggles with racism. Third, it shows the power of witnessing atrocity. Many black soldiers who saw concentration camps became civil rights activists. They'd witnessed what racial ideology could become, and they refused to accept even mild versions of it at home. The connection between Holocaust liberation and the civil rights movement is direct and causal. These veterans didn't just fight for civil rights, they understood viscerally what was at stake. Fourth, it demonstrates the complexity of memory and history. For decades, the story of black soldiers liberating concentration camps was minimized or forgotten. It didn't fit neatly into either Holocaust narratives, which focused on Jewish suffering and often white American liberators, or black history narratives, which focused on segregation and civil rights, not military service. Only recently have historians begun properly documenting and recognizing these stories. That recovery work matters. It shows us what we'd been missing. Finally, it reminds us that liberation isn't just physical. When black soldiers freed concentration camp prisoners, they didn't just unlock gates. They destroyed an ideology. They proved undeniably that Nazi racial theories were lies. And when those soldiers returned home and fought for civil rights, they continued that work. They proved that American racial segregation was equally unjust. The black soldiers who liberated concentration camps were liberators twice, once in Europe, once in America. April 29, 1945. Black soldiers roll into Dachau and see hell on earth. They see prisoners who can't believe black men are their liberators. They see the result of racial ideology taken to its extreme. They understand, in that moment, what they're fighting against and what they'll have to fight when they go home. These soldiers didn't ask to be symbols. They were just soldiers doing their jobs. But history made them more than that. They became proof that Nazi racial ideology was a lie. They became witnesses to what happens when racism goes unchecked, and many became activists, determined to end racial injustice in their own country. The black soldiers who liberated concentration camps were heroes twice, once in Europe, once in America. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. We're recovering stories from pivotal moments in history, stories that challenge, complicate, and enrich how we understand history. Comment below with where you're watching from and which story you want to hear next. Share this video. These stories survive when we refuse to let them be forgotten. Today, their names are being recovered. Memorials are being built. Educational programs are teaching their stories. But for decades, they were forgotten, erased from histories of both the Holocaust and Black America. Why? Because their story is complicated. It doesn't fit neatly into narratives about the good war or American heroism. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about American racism during the very war we fought against racism. But that discomfort is valuable. These soldiers' stories teach us that history is messy, that heroism and injustice can coexist, and that liberation is an ongoing process, not a single moment. The prisoners at Dachau and Buchenwald were freed in 1945, but the black soldiers who freed them had to keep fighting for their own freedom for decades afterward. Remember them. Remember what they witnessed. Remember what they fought for in Europe and in America. Remember that when they saw prisoners who couldn't believe black soldiers were their liberators, they didn't see irony. They saw a mission to prove through their actions that all of the racial ideologies, Nazi and American, were lies. They succeeded in Europe, and their children and grandchildren are still succeeding in America. Remember the black soldiers who liberated Nazi death camps. Remember what they saw, remember what they did, and remember what they still had to fight for when they came home. Their story isn't just history. It's a reminder that the fight against racial injustice is ongoing, that liberation is never complete, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who fight twice, once against an enemy abroad and once against injustice at home.